We'll start with the prayers. Please repeat after me. Om Sadashivasamārambhām
Om Sadashivasamārambhām
Shankaracharya-madhyamām
Shankaracharya-madhyamām
Asmadacharya-paryantāम्
Asmadacharya-paryantāम्
Vande Guru-paraṁparām
Vande
Guru
Guru-paramparam
Paramparam
Saraswati Namastubhyam
Saraswati Namastubhyam
Varade Kamarupini
Varade
Kamarupini
Kamarupini
Vidyarambham karishyami
Vidyarambham
Karishyami
Siddhir-bhavatu me sada
Siddhir-bhavatu me sada
Om Sahana-vavatu
Om Sahana Bhavatu
Sahanau bhunaktu
Sahana Bhunaktu
Saha Viryankaravavahai
Saha Viryam Karavavahe
Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai
Tejasvinavadhitamastu Vishavahe
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti
Vasudevendra Yogindram
Vasudevendra Yogindram
Natva Jnanapradam Gurum
Natva Jnanapradam Gurum
Mumukshunam Hitarthaya
Mumukshunam Hitarthaya
Tattvabodho Bhidhiyate
Tattvabodho Vidhiyate.
Om Namah Shivaya. Okay. All right. So last time we saw this verse. This is the very first verse of Tattva Bodha, and it is a prayer verse, right? So the author offers salutations to his teacher, and then he starts with the text. And we saw this also. This is the introductory line by the author to the text, and we saw what it covers. He covers what he's talking about, why he's talking about it, and at whom this is directed. So the subject is self-analysis, Atma Vichara, inquiry into the self. And why are we doing this analysis into the question, who am I? The purpose is for moksha. And what is moksha? First class, those 5 points. So that is moksha, a simplistic understanding. And then the question comes, for whom is this? Who is this directed at? And the answer is, it is for the adhikari student. Okay. Now, adhikari here means eligible. Okay. It is for the eligible student, the student who is fit and prepared. So what is the eligibility criteria in order to be called as, prepared for Jnanam? What is that criteria? So for that, the author has said that the one who has sadhana chatushtayam, he is eligible. Now, the question comes naturally, then what is sadhana chatushtayam? And that is what we are going to be discussing today. What is sadhana chatushtayam? So chatushtayam means 4, And sadhana here means qualifications. So the fourfold qualifications that prepare you and make you ready for jnanam. So the four virtues that you need to be having in order to pursue jnanam. Okay. And so now there is a question. Sadhana chatushtayam kim? Now, Tattva Bodha is in the form of question and answer. Okay, there is an imaginary student and there is a teacher, and the student is asking questions and the teacher is answering. Okay, and in fact, most of the scriptures, including Bhagavad Gita, including the Upanishads, all of them are a conversation between a student and a teacher. Okay, so there is a student, he will be asking questions, and there is a teacher who is teaching and giving the answers to these questions. Okay, now it's a very interesting, point, because it shows that in this culture, in this system, questioning is not only allowed, it is encouraged. Okay, questioning is encouraged. And in Bhagavad Gita, there is a verse where Krishna says one of the qualities of a student is pariprashnena. Okay, means with a questioning attitude, with a curiosity, the student must have. So, of course, there's two ways to ask a question. One is to, disprove the other person. You ask a question to kind of, with doubt, to question the other person's knowledge or authority. Obviously, we are not talking about that here, right? So here, the student is expected to ask the question out of genuine curiosity, with a genuine interest to know. Okay, and only then will he be willing to listen to the answer, and only when he listens to the answer will there be any benefit of the study, right? So if you ask the question with the attitude to disprove or to get into an argument, then it is not going to be a very productive pursuit, right? So that is the meaning of the word pariprashnena, which comes later. So the overall point is that this questioning attitude, this curiosity to know, to learn, that must be there for a student, and Shastra more than welcomes such a person, okay, who has questions. Now let us read what this verse says. Sadhana chatuштayam kim?
Sadhana
चतुष्टयं किम्
नित्यानित्यवस्तु विवेकः
नित्यानित्यवस्तु विवेकः
इहामूत्रार्थफलभोगविरागः
इहामूत्रार्थफलभोगविरागः
इहामूत्रार्थ फलभोगविरागः
फलभोगविरागः
शमादिषट्कसम्पत्तिः
शमादिषट्कसम्पत्तिः
मुमुक्षुत्वं चेति
मोक्षत्वं चेति.
So before we get into the meaning of this, just one point I want to add here. So I noticed that some of you were saying hal and bog. Okay, in Sanskrit it is hala and bogha. The akara has to come at the end of the word. Okay, so whenever there is a halant symbol, then you will say, for example, if this is there, then you will cut the word short. Okay, so it is not Ram, it is Rama, because there's no halant for the word Ram. That when that dash comes, it means you have to cut it short. If there is no dash, you have to add the akara. Okay, so in Sanskrit, that will be the correct pronunciation. So it will not be Arjun, it will be Arjuna. Okay. So now we come to the 4 qualifications that are necessary for the student to have. And what are they? They are Vivekaha, Viragaha, Shatka Sampatti, and Mumukshutva. Okay. 4 of them are there, and the author has given some small description about them, and later he explains in detail also. So the 4 of them are Vivekaha, Viragaha, Shat Sampatti, and Mumukshutva. The first one is called Vivekaha, and this we will see what it means and see what the author is saying about Vivekaha. He has given a small description for Viveka. He says Nitya Nitya Vastu. The word Nitya means permanent or eternal. Okay. Then there is the word Anitya. This word breaks and it becomes Anitya. The word Anitya means impermanent or temporary. And then there is Vastu, which means object. Then there is Vivekaha. So Vivekaha means discrimination or differentiation or discernment. Okay, so this discrimination is not, the gender bias discriminating against something. This discrimination here means having clarity of thought, having the ability to differentiate. And differentiate between what? Nitya Vastu and Anitya Vastu. The permanent object and the impermanent object. Having this clarity of thought is called Vivekaha. Now let us understand what this means. Okay. So let me ask you. Okay, look at this pen. Is this pen permanent? Is this pen going to be around forever?
No.
Okay, look at the table in front of you. What about that? Is that going to be around forever?
No. No.
No. Okay. What about your own body? Is that permanent?
No.
No.
What about the bodies of people you love?
No.
Not at all. No.
Not permanent. And what about the bodies of all the creatures on earth?
Not
No.
permanent. No.
Not permanent. Right. So it is, there's nothing new about this. There is common sense that all these things are not permanent. We all know this already. And yet, despite knowing this, why is there a lack of synchronicity between this intellectual understanding and your emotional response when an object goes away? When there is a death, for example. You know that the body is not permanent. One day it is going to drop. And yet when that happens, why is there, a very high emotional response to that? Okay, so this needs to be analyzed carefully. Now, I'm not saying don't be sad if somebody dies, okay? But you need to understand, you need to analyze why, despite knowing that, one day this would happen, why this emotion takes over. This needs to be analyzed and inquired into. The cause of sorrow, the problem, what we have is not with the world around us or with the object leaving. The problem is that we have a wrong expectation from that object. And what is that? We expect permanent happiness from the objects around us. And by object, I mean everything, including people, okay? Including relationships, including money, including wealth, including your job, including everything, okay? So we have this, wrong expectation, this unintelligent expectation that these objects will give me permanent happiness. But when the object is itself impermanent, how can it give you permanent happiness? This statement has to be digested very carefully. When the object itself has no permanent security, how can it give you permanent security? Okay. And having this understanding, having this clarity of thought that no impermanent object can give me permanent happiness, that is called vivekaha. Okay. So you must know where to seek the correct thing. If you seek the wrong thing from the wrong source, then you are going to end up in misery, right? It's like walking into a vegetable shop and asking for clothes. Okay, so it is not the vegetable shop's fault. It is my own fault for walking in there and setting myself up for disappointment. I should be knowing that I won't get clothes at a vegetable shop, right? In the same way, I have to know very clearly that I cannot expect permanent happiness from objects that are themselves temporary in nature. Now, you know, so with this, the question comes, so what should I do? Then does this mean that I have to start avoiding these objects altogether or avoiding all these temporary pleasures and happinesses? So Vedanta says no. Okay, so you are not, Vedanta is one of those unique philosophies that does not ask you to drop these things. So you can enjoy the object, you can enjoy the pleasure, but do it with the full knowledge that it is temporary. One day it is going to go away. Okay, somehow inevitably this object and the happiness associated with that object, it is going to go away. And do indulge in that happiness with that knowledge, with that very clear understanding. So you can enjoy the temporary pleasure as long as you know that it is temporary. Now, still, despite knowing this, still sometimes, the emotions are very strong. And I do know that it's temporary and all that. But still, despite knowing this, the emotions become very strong. So now you may ask why? How does that happen? That is because the Viveka Shakti is not strong enough. Okay? A mind that is in the grip of strong emotions cannot access its intellectual faculty. Okay, so for example, think of the last time when you were very angry, uncontrollably angry. Okay, and somebody told you, calm down. Now, when you're angry and somebody tells you, calm down, it is actually very logical advice, right? Because you're not going to achieve anything by being angry. It's not good for your health. It's not good for the situation. You won't resolve anything. Any decision you make when you're that angry is probably going to backfire, right? All of this is correct. And so calm down is a very logical, advice. But in the history of humanity, has calm down ever worked on anybody who is angry? I don't think so, right? In fact, it actually makes them more angry. They'll be
Yes,
like, how
well,
dare you tell me to calm down? It works in the reverse. So when the mind is in the grip of very strong emotions, logic will not work. Okay, you cannot access your intellect. You cannot invoke your logic. And Viveka, as you can see, is the engagement of the intellect in the highest possible way. Okay. And so, if the mind is so strongly turbulent, it becomes very difficult to engage your viveka. And that is why in the first class, I spoke about FIR, frequency, intensity, and recovery time of emotional responses. And that is why for the study of Vedanta, a low FIR is required. In other words, a very calm and tranquil mind is required for the study of Vedanta. Because if the mind is highly emotional, then it becomes difficult to be logical. And as you can see, we are doing an inquiry with logic. Okay, so this is the understanding of Nitya, Anitya, Vastu, Vivekaha. Any questions?
Hello, Meghaji.
Yes.
Now, these emotions, okay, till anger, it is okay to control, but then grief sometimes is so much. When you lose somebody, then, these theoretical things remain theoretical only. And practicality is you do go through the grief and take a lot of time to recover.
That's right. And grief is also a strong emotion. Anger is, somehow easier to relate to and this thing. But grief is also an emotion finally. And with that, we come to the answer to your question is in the second point, viragaha. Okay, so now we will get into that and discuss that a bit.
Thank you.
So the word viragaha means detachment. Okay. Now this is a weird word in English. Frankly, I don't like it. People think detach means you're aloof or just separated from something, but that is not the understanding we are going to get here. The word ragaha means attachment, being addicted to something, being obsessed with something. Okay, it can also mean like. Okay, likes and dislikes. So that like is ragaha. In other words, attachment. Viragaha means without attachment, dispassion or detachment. Now in English, these words have a negative connotation, but once you understand the meaning, you will realize it is not so. So let's look at these words. Iha. Iha means here and now. Amutra. Amutra means later in the future. And then there is a word artha. Artha has to be applied to iha and amutra. And here artha can be taken to mean a situation or an object.
Some say he is an alien. Others say that he is an artist.
Okay, I'm just going to mute everybody. Yeah. Okay, so artha means a situation or an object you can take. And halabhoga means experience of that fruit. Okay, so in other words, the whole thing means experiences or pleasurable experiences rather, here and now or in the future situations or future objects. Okay, and not having any desire or attachment to any kind of pleasurable experiences, that is called viragaha. Now I clarify pleasurable experiences because nobody craves for painful experiences. So already there is viraga to painful experiences, but we need to develop for pleasurable experiences because the attachment is to pleasure. This we will see in some detail. The author himself will explain a bit, so I will come back to it later, but this is the meaning, the simple meaning, that not having any addiction to either present or future pleasures. Then the next one is Shatka Sampatti. Shatka means 6, Sampatti means wealth. Okay, and here we're talking about inner wealth. And what is the inner wealth? It is discipline, self-discipline. And there are 6 of those disciplines. And what are they? We will see later. But the first one is Shama. Adi means etc. So Shama, etc. These 6 inner disciplines is what the author is telling. So these 6 disciplines starting from Shama, Shama, etc. So we will see those also later. And then there is Mumukshutvam. Mumukshutvam means a desire for moksha, a longing for moksha. The longing itself is called mumukshutvam, and the one who has this longing is called a mumukshuhu. Okay, mumukshuhu. All right, so these are the 4. Cheti. Cheti means cha iti. Cha means and. Okay, in Sanskrit, the and comes at the end of the list. So in English, you would say Rama and Sita and Lakshmana. The and comes in between, right? But in Sanskrit, there are many placements, but usually you would find it at the end of the list. Iti means in this manner or this is it, like to kind of conclude, this is it. And when you combine cha and iti, you get cheti. Okay, so it says, and this is it. Right? So any questions? These are the four: Vivekaha, Viragaha, Shat Sampatti, and Mumukshutvam. Any questions? We are going to go into the details of this. Okay. So these are the fourfold qualifications. Viveka is discrimination, Viraga is dispassion, Shat Sampatti is discipline, Mumukshutvam is the desire for moksha, and together you can call them the 4 Ds. Easy to remember. Okay. Now let us read some more. So now the student is curious. He wants some more details on each of these things. So he is asking the teacher the question about each of these things, and the teacher is elaborating a little more. So let's read this. Nitya nitya vastu vivekakkaha.
Nitya nityavastu vivekakah.
Nityavastvekam brahma.
Nityavastvekam brahma.
Tadvyatiriktam.
Tadvyatiriktam.
Sarvamanityam.
Sarvamanityam.
Ayameva.
Ayameva.
Nitya nityavastu vivekaha.
Nitya nityavastu vivekah.
Right. So the student has now asked the question, what is this nitya nitya vastu vivekaha? Kaha means what? And he's asking what do you mean by this nitya nitya vastu vivekaha? What is what you mean by differentiation between permanent and impermanent object? Now we already understood that the wrong expectation, the foolish expectation of having of expecting permanent happiness from the wrong source, that is the impermanent objects, is the cause of our sorrow. But there is a hidden question in this. Okay, it's a very obvious kind of question. Can you guess what it is? Any idea?
What is permanent?
Yes, very good. Okay, so the question naturally comes up, right? Because when you look around you, everything is impermanent, right? And now science tells us that even the planet is itself impermanent, right? The sun is also impermanent. One day the sun will also have a kind of a death, right? And obviously if the sun is not there, then the earth cannot be there. Of course, it has a very long lifespan, billions of years, but still there is an end date, right? So when this is the case, you get this question that, is there anything that is permanent? Is there anything that, is there forever? And so Shastra answers that there is only one thing that is permanent, and that is called Brahman, okay, or Atman. Atman and Brahman are the same thing, same 2 words for the same thing. So don't get confused if I use the words interchangeably. So Brahman, okay, there is something called Brahman, and that is the only thing that is permanent, and everything else is impermanent. Everything else comes and goes. The word Brahman comes from the root Briha, okay, and Briha means big or vast, infinitely huge. This Brahman is not bound by any type of finitude. Okay. Now, in general, there are 2 types of limitations for every object. One limitation is a time-wise limitation, and the other one is a space-wise limitation. So you look at any object and it has a time-wise limitation, meaning that it has a date of birth and a date of expiry. Okay, the gap in between can vary, but definitely there is going to be a date when it comes into existence and a day when it goes out of existence. So there is birth and there is death. So this applies to everything. So including the human body, including the planet, including the sun, including everything. Okay, so this is a time-wise limitation. So everything is bound by time. Then there is a space-wise limitation. Means that, look at this pen. It exists or it occupies a small amount of space, meaning there is a boundary. This much only is the pen and everything else is not the pen, right? So it is bound by space. It has a spatial limitation, okay? But this Brahman is not bound by time, nor is it bound by space, okay? Brahman was never born and will never die. Means it is permanently there, always there, eternally present. Okay, and since it has no space boundary, it is there everywhere. It is all pervading. In a sense, you can say it is even beyond time and space. Okay, because it is not bound by time and space. Whereas every other object in the universe that you can think of is bound by time and space. And this is the understanding. So this is the author's answer to the question Nitya, Anitya, Vastu, Vivekaha. Vivekaha is having this understanding that only Brahman is permanent and everything else is impermanent. And therefore, the impermanent objects can definitely not give you permanent joy. And so the source of permanent happiness must be Brahman only. And how is that? We will see in the later classes. Okay, now let's look at the verse. It says, Nitya means the permanent, Vastu, object, Ekam. Ekam means one, Brahma. So Nitya Vastu Ekam Brahma. There is only one permanent object and that is Brahman. And then Tat Vyatiriktam, Tat and Vyatiriktam. Vyatiriktam means other than or different from. And Tat means that. So Tat Vyatiriktam means other than that. Other than what? Other than Brahman. Obviously, we're talking about Brahman. So other than Brahman, Sarvam Anityam. Everything else is Anitya. Everything else is impermanent. So that is the translation of this verse. It says only Brahman is permanent. Everything else is impermanent. Okay. Ayam eva is ayam plus eva. Ayam means this. Eva means indeed. So this alone or this understanding is what is called Nitya Nitya Vastu Vivekaha. Okay. Any questions? All very clear?
How to understand the meaning of these words?
The Sanskrit, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, it the more and more you just become familiar with it, the more and more you study and read, it develops, it grows on you.
Okay. So now I'm getting reacquainted to the language, which I studied for many years in schooling. But the meanings, is there any book or where we can indulge more and start grabbing the meaning of individual words?
Okay, that's a loaded question. Fine. So the individual words have multiple meanings. If you open a dictionary and if you type any word, you will get a whole list of meanings. Okay, some of them have up to 25, 40 meanings also. Okay, so then which meaning will you apply where? And that is why a teacher is necessary for the study. Okay, and we will, I think I've mentioned this before, that Shastra is not for independent self-study. You are not supposed to read and study. Okay, and that is why it says Shravanam Mananam Nididhyasnam. Shravanam means to listen, right?
Yes.
And listening always involves two people, somebody who is telling and somebody who is listening. It never says Patanam Mananam Nididhyasnam. Patanam means to read. Okay, so it is not, encouraged to read. And also there's a lot of scope for mistranslations, misunderstandings when you read. Okay, so how to become more familiar and how to, kind of go in more into this deeper understanding is by coming back and listening to the recordings again and again. Okay, and of course, as you progress more and more in the classes, your exposure increases, your understanding also will improve. And of course, you have to make notes. And if any book you want to refer, you refer to your own notes for the time being. Okay. Later on, once the framework is set, then you can go to reading, and then whatever you read, you will understand correctly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So no doubts on what is Vivekaha? Okay. Fine. Then we will move to the next one, which is called Viragaha. Okay. So as I explained, Viragaha translates as detachment or dispassion. Now let's read this. Viragakaha.
Viragakaha.
Iha swarga.
Yes.
Swarga
Bhogeshu.
Bhogeshu
Icharahityam.
Icharahityam.
Okay. So the question is, what is Viragaha? And the teacher has given the answer. Iha swarga bhogeshu ichha rahityam. Ichha means desire or attachment, here we can take it. And rahityam means absence of. So absence of having any longing or desire. For what? For iha and swarga bhogeshu. Bhogeshu means an experience, and here obviously pleasurable experience. Nobody asks for painful experiences. So iha bhogeshu, experiences here and now, and swarga bhogeshu. Swarga means heaven. So having a desire for another world and another, the next life, having a desire for pleasurable experiences in the next life or even in heaven. Or it can even be interpreted as the future. Okay, having a desire for, a heaven kind of future. You can take it that way also, or you can take it to mean heaven itself. So now this has to be understood very carefully. Vedanta does not say don't indulge in sense pleasures or don't indulge in any object. What is asked to be avoided is the addiction to these objects, the obsession to these objects, becoming an emotional slave to these objects. That freedom is called viragaha. And when you have freedom from being a slave to an object, obviously you have mastery. And that mastery is being called as vairagyam. Okay, so externally, physically, you need not give up the object. But mentally, you are supposed to develop a distance. Now, it is a bitter truth, as we discussed previously, that everything is impermanent, including the body. And yet somehow, we delude ourselves into thinking that, it's permanent, it's going to be around. And somehow we get attached. We don't want to face the bitter truth that all these things are impermanent. And one day, inevitably, there is going to be a separation. And the more attached you are, the more addicted you are to these things, the more painful that separation is going to become. right? You know, when you ask people to, there are some people, if you ask them to drop the attachment, they will drop this very class because they don't want to face the bitter truth, right? But it is inevitable and it is there for everyone to see that if you don't drop the object will drop you someday, right? Just a moment.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes.
See, what happens, for an example, I'll take maybe as a TV, as a television, a middle class family or a lower middle class family, when someone buys a television, okay, it's everyone is taught in the family like that, okay, this is a very expensive thing, or we need to take care of that object very well so that it lasts longer. So knowingly or unknowingly, what happens is we start caring about that object so much, we get attached to that. How do we handle that?
Okay. So, we are not saying don't use the TV or don't look after the TV. It is practical to look after the TV. It is an expensive object. But suppose something happens to that TV. What happens to your FIR? That is what is being addressed here. Ideally, as you progress in Vedanta, nothing should be happening to the FIR. It is just another object. And you knew that one day this TV is going to be separated from you, right? So this is the understanding. And when it comes to people, this is a question that how can I, be affectionate or take care of a person or even an object without, becoming attached. So there is a difference between attachment and love. In fact, they are diametrically opposite. To love something 100%, you need 100% detachment to that object. Okay? Attachment cannot be called as love. Attachment is filled with worry. It is filled with grief. It clouds your judgment, and it is more of a selfish nature. What can this person or this thing do for me? Whereas love is unconditional. You don't have any expectations from that object or from that person, and it will never cloud your judgment. It will never disturb your FIR. Only when that happens, that is called love. And this is dealt with in detail in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna is going through the same problem. It starts with raga, is attachment, and it leads to shoka, which is sorrow, and the sorrow leads to moha, which is delusion. Okay, it's a progressive thing. So over time, you have to work on vairagyam using viveka. Okay, you have to. So this comes to what this I'm continuing with what I'm saying, that this bitter truth that we don't want to face, we have to face it, and we have to start preparing to cut that bond. Okay, you have to be ready to cut that bond. Why? Because the separation is inevitable. It will happen. Either the object will drop you or you have to drop the object. And sometimes it might be even a forced separation, but it is bound to happen. But the more sticky you are with that object, the more painful that whole experience is going to be. Okay, and so from as early as possible, you have to start getting ready to cut that bond. Okay, and in Viveka Chudamani, Shankaracharya uses a word, special word, he calls it jihasa. Jihasa means the willingness or the preparedness to drop the attachment to the object. Now note, I'm not saying drop the object itself. I'm saying the willingness to drop the attachment to the object. As long as the object is there, definitely enjoy it, definitely cherish it, but know that one day the object is going to go away, and that day you have to be ready to drop the attachment. And that is vairagyam. It is at a mental level. And in fact, vairagyam is one of the toughest and one of the last virtues to develop. Okay. And of course, again, the foundation is on viveka only. The stronger and stronger your viveka becomes, the stronger your vairagya becomes, then the grip of the emotions also starts to reduce. Okay. And with this, the question comes, why is vairagyam needed? Why do I need it? Right? I can live without vairagyam also. So for this, the answer is that a mind that is addicted or obsessed to something else, that mind becomes unavailable for the study of Vedanta. Okay. And not just Vedanta, it in fact becomes unavailable for any kind of productive venture. Any constructive action becomes difficult because this mind cannot do anything valuable. Why? Because it is constantly obsessing about the object. And it becomes filled with anxiety and worry and eventually leads to grief and sorrow. And such a mind cannot even do a worldly productive activity. How can it engage in Vedanta? And so Shastra says that is why Vairagyam becomes very important to develop and to possess. Okay, and it will not happen by itself. It will take some effort and it does require Viveka. And so there is a tip given by Shankaracharya in Viveka Chudamani on how to develop Vairagyam. There are many tips, but one is in Viveka Chudamani. And in Tattva Bodha, the author does not talk about it, okay? He assumes that we are all Vairagis and he just moves to the next point. But in Viveka Chudamani, Shankaracharya says, Dosha Darshanam. Dosha means the defect. Darshanam is to see. Okay, so constantly becoming aware of the harmful effects of attachment. So you already know what happens with attachment. What is the end result? It is obviously sorrow and delusion. It is obviously anxiety and grief. It is worry. All of these things come along with attachment when you become too attached to any object. And definitely no important, you cannot do anything meaningfully or something important. You cannot do it well if you're thinking of some other object, right? And so dosha darshanam, becoming aware of the harmful effects of attachment constantly and reminding yourself again and again, keep on seeing this. This is called dosha darshanam. And as you do this more and more, vairagyam will also increase as you remind yourself more and more. Okay. So any questions?
Yeah. Acharya, growing up, I used to feel excitement for many sensory pleasures, the smell, the taste, or going to new locations, meeting new people. But so through course of years, now I don't feel excitement for anything in the sense almost 99% of the wishes I used to have in teens and preteens. So now I don't have excitement for anything. So sometimes I feel sad losing the act of meeting new people, tasting or smelling new things. So all the sensory things which used to give me excitement, now it became very blunt and boring for me. So
that I don't think that is Vairagyam. Vairagyam doesn't say you should not have excitement or not enjoy these things. Okay, so it's interesting because something similar happens to Arjuna in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. It can be mistaken for Vairagyam, but it is actually not. At one point, Arjuna says, I don't want all this kingdom and I don't want to fight this war. I don't want the riches. I don't want to be a king. I don't even want heaven. I want nothing. Just leave me alone kind of thing, he says. At that point, it sounds very much like, oh, this person has so much dispassion and so much detachment, but that is not what is happening with Arjuna. With him, it is at that point depression, unfortunately, okay? So there is a very fine line between that and Vairagyam. Later in the second chapter, he again, this time he says the same thing, but in a different way. He says, I'm not interested in kingdoms and in heavens. Please teach me Jnanam. That time it is Vairagyam. Okay, so there's a very fine line. And as for your particular thing, you will just have to, just keep, studying, keep exploring, inquiring into yourself. I think the answer will come.
Oh, thank you.
Medhaji, I
Yes.
had a doubt.
Yes.
You said the word dosha something. I couldn't get the second part of the word.
Darshanam.
Darshanam. Okay.
Dosha darshanam.
Thank you. Awareness of.
To see or to be aware of.
Yes.
Right. So this is the, this is the discussion on Vairagyam, which is dispassion or detachment. As you can see, it is quite different from the English word detachment. Okay. In English, it means to remove yourself from there or to be separated from.
Yes.
So I don't like the English word, but Vairagyam has a much better meaning. And in fact, they say that having this mental or internal Vairagyam is what is called being a sannyasi. Okay, sannyasi need not mean, wearing the orange clothes and, taking up formal sannyas.
Correct.
Even a grihastha can be a sannyasi if he has internal vairagyam at the mental level. Okay, so physically you need not drop anything, but mentally that preparedness or willingness to drop the attachment must be there. Okay, and that is vairagyam.
Yes.
And that is why it says here, not freedom from sensory pleasures, but freedom from addiction to sensory pleasures. Most of us are grihasthas, we have families, we may have children, we have jobs, responsibilities, duties. It is not possible to drop everything and go to Himalayas and totally avoid all sensory pleasures, right? But despite living in this world, how to manage, how to not be addicted to them, that is called Vairagyam.
Medhaji,
Yeah.
I have a question. Normally, at what age are all these virtues expected to be in a person? Like Viveka and Vairagya.
This is a question, like, you find some very elderly people who are very attached to everything, and then you find also some children who are very detached and they remain that way throughout their life. Okay. So where did this come from? This is not a journey of one lifetime. It is a continuous effort across several lifetimes. So it is not at one particular age that these things come. You have to work on them, and it will slowly come. And whatever has come, it will carry into the next life.
Okay.
Okay, so that is why you find some children who are more mature for their age, very mature for their age, whereas you find some very elderly people also behaving like children. If you understand what I mean.
Yes, I got it.
In childish ways. Where did that come from? That is because the journey, you cannot look at it in just one lifetime. You have to look across all the lifetimes. Because we cannot see all that, but the idea is that.
Ma'am, so is it advisable to give this kind of jnanam from a very early age to people so that slowly and gradually they understand about all these things?
Ideally they should, but ultimately you cannot control the receptivity, If they are ready to accept and to understand this, then they will. Okay. But if they are not, then there's nothing you can do. So it's not about the age, it's about the eligibility. That's why the text starts with the eligibility. He does not start with the age of a person. right? The Tattva Bodha text does not start by telling you need to be of this age to study Tattva Bodha. He starts by telling if you have these qualities, then, it becomes, the Jnanam part becomes easy. And there are ways, lot of sadhanas are given in many of the texts to develop these things. Okay, so one of the most famous ones in today's world is Hatha Yoga. Yoga practice, pranayama, meditation, all of these things will build these qualities. It will reduce your FIR. So that is the purpose of all sadhana, to reduce the FIR, to make the mind calm. Okay?
These should have been included in the curriculum, school curriculum, as an introductory chapter, so that the children can be exposed to it in the school.
Ideally, this should be taught in school, but that's like neither here or not here nor there. Yeah, we won't get into that now. There's a lot of problems trying to get this.
Isn't this taught in monasteries and in gurukuls or mutts? Like
it is to some extent. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But obviously those are a minority, so.
Can I add something? I think it is the parental education now. No parents, children are opting for Sanskrit language in schools. They go for German and French, and very few newer generation is not even versed to the Sanskrit language. It's such a beautiful language. So maybe beginning, one has to encourage that they should opt for Sanskrit. Then later it can be introduced.
You know, the way Sanskrit is taught in schools is so bad. It's such a big, like it really puts you off, puts anybody off, especially small children. They start by making them memorize things and there's no logic. The way it is taught, I'm telling, Sanskrit is not like that actually, but the way it is taught is very bad in schools. And it was designed by, sometime during the British invasion or something, there's a big history behind all this, that it is designed to be unappealing, Sanskrit, okay, the way it is taught in schools. But actually, when you look at all these, Western textbooks and all that, the main textbook that is being used for Sanskrit language in schools is written by a Western author, and it is in a very unappealing way. In fact, I have seen and studied from that book. It is very bad, okay? But when you study Sanskrit the way it has to be studied, if you study Panini grammar rules, it is mathematics. It is such a logical thing. It is so beautiful. Yes. And it is so, and when they say that NASA is thinking of adopting Sanskrit as their computer coding language or whatever they say, there's some news, that makes sense when you study Panini's grammar rules. It's like maths. Every step is derived from a previous step and with logic. And when you study it that way, it is very beautiful. But they don't teach it that way in schools. And it's more of memorization. There's no logic. And there's so much to remember that kids get very irritated. It gets irritating for anybody. And some of the translations are quite misleading and all that. Anyway, that is
a big discussion. Yeah, thank you.
Is there any chance you can start a session for kids to learn Sanskrit?
Well, not for kids, but for you guys, there is one going on with another teacher. If you're interested, but there are some classes already over, I think. I'll just check.
There are 3 or 4 classes she has taken, Shivani Atri. And today also in the evening, we'll be having one more.
Yeah, so basics of Sanskrit have been covered.
She explains beautifully everything, grammar and all.
So that class is there. I'll just check with and see if, it's possible to join at this time. Okay, so little more is there. I'm going to take 5 minutes more because just a little bit more of Vairagyam is left. Okay, so there are 2 kinds of sensory pleasures, adharmic and dharmic. Okay, adharmic means immoral or unethical. Dharmic means moral or ethical. Okay, so it is, why this comes up is because you have to understand what is a moral and immoral kind of sensory pleasures. Now, Okay, let me give you an example. Having a desire to, work really hard at your job and get a promotion, is that dharmic or adharmic?
Adharmic.
Why? What are you doing wrong?
Adharmic because it's not permanent. It's
No, I'm not talking about permanent or impermanent. I'm talking, is it right or wrong to work hard and get a promotion in your job?
It's right.
In a sense,
Dharmic.
It's right.
It is dharmic.
It is acceptable. Yes.
It is right. There's nothing wrong in wanting to work hard, work well, and be recognized and get a promotion for that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. What about, suppose you want to educate your children really well? Is that dharmic or adharmic?
Dharmic.
Dharmic. It's very much dharmic to want to take care of your children properly. Suppose you want to, take care of your parents in their old age. That
Dharmic.
Moral.
Dharmic. Right. It is your responsibility to look after your parents when they are old. So definitely it is dharmic. Now, supposing I want to get very rich and so I decide to rob a bank. What is that now?
Adharmic.
Adharmic, right? Obviously, because stealing is not ethical. So this is the difference between dharmic and adharmic. So it is kind of common sense, right? You don't need to think too much about whether something has to be done or not. In fact, the whole legal system is based on this. There are some acts that are definitely not to be done. Killing people, robbing from people, cheating people, all these things are definitely adharmic. Shastra says that these kind of adharmic acts must be totally avoided. Adharmic pleasures must be completely avoided. And the dharmic pleasures can be indulged in moderation. Okay, the key word being moderation. Why? Why moderation? Because if you overindulge, then again you're going to be addicted. Again, you're going to be obsessing about it. Again, we go back into the whole raga, shoka, moha cycle, right? So, in moderation, so that this restraint will prevent addiction. Okay, but it is okay to indulge in dharmic pleasures in a moderate kind of way. Okay, then there is two kinds of experiences. Ihaloka bhogaha. Ihaloka means this world, and paraloka bhogaha. Para means another. So, the experiences in this present life, here and now, and experiences in another life later on. It can be, the next life, or it can be Swarga. It can be a next life in Swarga, or it can be some future that you are planning within this life itself. So both these kind of experiences, having that vairagyam towards both future and present pleasures, that is called vairagyam. Okay. With this, we are done for today. Any questions you have can be posted on the group. Yeah, so we'll stop for now. So it is time up, so we'll finish with the prayer. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate
Purnamada
Purnamaya Purnamavashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you all.
Namah Shivaya. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much.
Bye.